All right, so we got to talk about something. We have to talk about plotting. Why do we have to talk about plotting? Because I've been thinking about it, and if I don't talk about stuff, then it stays in my brain forever and I can't get it out. So, this is my attempt to get it out. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author. I like making YouTube videos about writing and about being an author. So if you have any questions about that kind of stuff, leave them in a comment and I'll do a video on them. Anyway, we're going to talk about plotting because plotting is important. At least that's what I'm trying to convince myself. You see, I wrote the first 6 books in my Titan series, more commonly referred to as Nova Terra, with absolutely zero plot. Which, in retrospect, is probably why the books kind of just meander wherever they want to go. And personally, I love it. That's like my style of book. I really do write what I like. And so, it took me a long time as an author to learn how to plot, to embrace plotting. And this video is really for all of those people who aren't big plotters right now and don't really understand the value of it. And also for all of those people who are really detailed plotters, but have trouble then getting through their manuscripts and turning those plots into actual books. Because I think that there is a better way, that there is a third, more organic way. And I think everybody should at least try it. Whether or not it works for you, doesn't matter. You should at least try it. And so I want to talk today about both the importance of plotting and different plotting styles. First, the importance of plotting. Knowing where you're going is just really important. It's really important to be able to identify where it is you're going. And it's really hard to do that if you haven't written it down. Plus, writing ideas down does this weird thing to us. It helps us understand whether something is true or not. Because when you write it down and you see it written on the paper, it's a lot easier to just be like, no, that's wrong. There's something about this that's wrong. When it's in your head, it's way harder to determine if something is right or wrong. And so, learning to write, learning to put your ideas down on paper can really help in clarifying what is true and what is not. That's especially helpful in a story where sometimes we have ideas that are almost right, but aren't quite right. And so when we write them down, all of a sudden we're faced with sort of the reality of them, and we can say, oh, that idea is good, but it's not quite there yet. Or that idea is just flat out bad, and I need to get rid of it. Or that idea is perfect, and so I'm going to use it. So plotting is really a helpful tool. It's helpful to map out where you're going. But not all plotting is created equal. And that's what I'm going to try to convince you of in this video. Not really. I'm more just going to talk about the 3 major categories of plotting. The first is highly detailed plotting, or what you might call full plotting. That's where you do a really detailed description of every chapter, every scene, every story beat, every change in every character, and you identify everything. The advantage of plotting this way is that you end up in a situation where everything is spelled out already, and so when you go back to write, it's actually fairly easy to write. If you're a person who doesn't really like uncertainty, if you're a person who doesn't like sort of the chaos of not having a clear plan, then this kind of plotting is probably something that you enjoy. However, the downside is that it takes a long time and that it becomes harder to actually write the story because in a weird way, your brain already thinks you wrote the story. Plus, if you practice full plotting, then it's a lot harder to introduce the element of surprise into your story. It's not impossible. Some people do it, but it is very difficult. Surprise often has to do with spontaneity, something happening that is unexpected and sort of pops up out of nowhere, a deviation from the path on a whim. But if you practice full plotting, then you don't tend to have those deviations. And that can pull a lot of the wonder and the excitement out of a story. You can absolutely be a full plotter and still write great stories and still write exciting adventures and have lots of surprise. You can do it. It's just a little bit harder because, again, everything has to be laid out ahead of time. So what about the opposite end of the spectrum? That is just no plotting. And if you're a person who practices no plotting, then your stories are probably full of sort of serendipity and surprise and these delightful little forays off the path. But your plots probably have problems. It's probably a lot harder for you to write a tight plot. I know it is for me. One of the advantages, of course, of no plotting is that the story itself takes you where it wants to go. And often that's actually better than what we can construct in our head. And I know that some of you are probably listening to this and being like, Seth, that's absolute BS. What I come up with in my head is way better than when I just sit down and type out whatever garbage. But I would challenge you that that might not actually be true. See, our brains are connection machines. And sometimes you can't see the right connection until you are buried deep. Sometimes it's helpful to have that high-level overview that plotting gives us, but sometimes you need to be in the midst of it. You need to be feeling the feelings in order to come up with the best twist or the best deviation from the expected path. You need to be immersed in the story itself if you want to tease out the best path forward. Now, of course, the potential downfall of no plotting is that you just end up in this place where your story isn't going anywhere, or you don't know what to do next, or your plot is full of holes. Plus, no plotting also typically takes longer to write because you have to think about it in the moment. Whereas somebody who's doing full plotting already has the answer at their fingertips. So, we've talked about full plotting, we've talked about no plotting. What is the third way? And that is just partial plotting. It's just taking the best pieces of each of these two different styles of plotting and saying, you know what, I'm going to do what's most effective for me, but I'm also going to incorporate pieces from the style I don't choose in order to round myself out, in order to be a better writer. I think often in the writing world, just like every other industry ever, we identify sort of characteristics of the job, and then we absorb them and apply them to ourselves as our identity. I am a plotter. I am a pantser. I am a fast writer. I am a slow writer. All of these things are not actually true. You are a writer, and you are plotting your book. You are a writer, and you are pantsing your book. You are a writer, and you are currently writing quickly. You are a writer, and you are currently writing slow. I often talk about the separation that we need to have with our art. The fact that what we create is not who we are, but often we label ourselves with all of these different categories, and we say, well, this is who I am. No, that's what you do. And what you do can change. Like I said, I pantsed the first 6 books that I wrote. And then, seeing the weaknesses of my complete pantsing, no plotting style, I started to change. I started to take actions that pushed me towards plotting. And honestly, they were uncomfortable. I didn't like it. It takes too much time. I hate spending all of that time thinking about a story before I start writing the story. And yet, once I sat down and forced myself to plot, I realized that there is tremendous value in it, even for me. Now, I use a hybrid approach, and everybody's going to be slightly different as to where they fall on the spectrum of no plot versus super detailed plot. And I would say I'm a little bit over towards pantsing still, because what I'll do is I'll write a high-level plot, sort of one phrase or a couple of words for every chapter I'm doing, and then I do 4 or 5 scenes in that chapter as just sort of touch points to help me keep my brain moving, but I don't fill out everything else, which means that I'm making up names, I'm making up places, I'm making up factions, I'm making up a lot of that kind of stuff as I go. And then I'll record a little bit of information about them, and then I'll continue on. And often I find that I get to a certain point in my manuscript and serendipity strikes and I head a different direction, completely bypassing my plot, which is okay. But then, because I have spent some time plotting, because I've spent some time crafting the story ahead of time, I know where I need to come back to, right? I'm not just now lost out in the wilderness. I have the landmarks I need to get back on track and to move towards the end of the story. So I found that incredibly helpful, to split the difference between plotting and pantsing and to work in the middle where it works for me. We're all different. We all have different tolerances for plotting and for pantsing, and we need to lean into our strengths, but we also need to be able to shore up our weaknesses. And I will say that it can be really uncomfortable to try to write in a way that is different than the way you normally write, but it's also a growing experience. And that's what we want to do. We want to keep growing, keep improving, keep sharpening our skills. So I would encourage you, if you are a heavy plotter, you're somebody who likes to fully plot your manuscript before you start, I would really recommend that you try writing a story without plotting and just see what happens. See if there are pieces of the no plot style that you can introduce into your writing. And if you're a person who doesn't normally plot your stories, I would really recommend that you try writing yourself a plot before your next story. Just see what happens. Again, the point is for us to grow and expand. And in order to do that, we have to try things that are outside what we normally do. Anyway, I hope this was helpful to you. Now it's out of my brain and I can stop thinking about it and get back to writing.